What's up, everyone? Going to talk about board games, maps, and board games with maps. Now look, folks, I'd consider myself a pretty big board game guy. I'd also consider myself a pretty big map guy. And all those glowing credentials were to set up the middle of that interest Venn diagram, maps depicted in board games. Or maybe board games depicting maps? Whatever, you get it. So many board games depict all manner of things that are usefully placed and moved on a map printed onto a board. And so, I wanted to talk about the most famous, or my most favorite, board game maps. And there's hardly a more obvious place to start than the classic world map board game, Classic Risk. Risk, it's fair to say, is probably on the short list of most ubiquitous board games, at least in the American context. It was first created in France under the name La Conquête du Monde, or The Conquest of the World. It later got the English moniker Risk, which then went alongside varying subtitles. The Continental game was one version, which seemed to be seeking to de-emphasize the war part and emphasize the geography part. The manufacturers then seem to have settled on the middle ground of the game of global domination. Naturally, if your game is about continents or global domination or whatever it is, you probably got a global map to go along with it. Classic Risk, across versions and languages, has simplified world political geography into usually 42 regions. These regions have various names and have occasionally raised various eyebrows. In most versions that I've played, the most bizarrely labeled region is Ukraine. And it usually is a vast area that stretches to take on the entirety of the east of Europe. It literally reaches the shores of 4 bodies of water, the Baltic, Black, and Caspian Seas, and north to the Arctic. It's so bizarre, of course, because the modern country Ukraine is limited to the shores of just the Black Sea and takes up a minority of the land labeled such in the board game. Some versions of the game label this area Eastern Europe, which is probably the most diplomatic choice for it, especially compared to the ones that label it all Russia. Looking up any reasoning or background for why some versions of the game have this mega Ukraine was complicated by the elephant in the room, at least at the time of this video's writing, the ongoing invasion by Russia of Ukraine. Any Google search that has why, Ukraine, map, risk in it ends up bogged down by news and articles about this war. And there's even an op-ed on medium.com that compares the strategic decisions of the leaders involved to rolling the dice in the game, Risk, just with lethal and destructive real-world consequences. Nothing I've found directly answers this question about the creation of the board game, though. I choose to believe Redditor Royale with Cheese, who made the comparison between the region mapped on the board to the Kievan Rus state from the High Middle Ages. Comparing the historic boundaries to the game board are actually a pretty close match. Maybe it's worth giving the benefit of the doubt to whoever's decision it was if they put this old region under the name of the modern country, who shares its capital. It's also worth noting the omissions of the Risk world map. The lowest hanging fruit is, of course, New Zealand, nowhere to be found, yet another entry to r/maps without New Zealand. There are some more egregious island country omissions as well. Madagascar does make the cut, but not the nearly 4 times more populous Philippines, nor any Caribbean islands like Cuba, Jamaica, or Hispaniola. There's probably plenty more to talk about with Risk, and maybe I'll come back to it. But now I want to tell you about when I happened upon a beautiful board game board for a game called Pan Am, a game based upon the history of the American airline of the same name. The game puts players in charge of other airlines around the world with the goal of being consolidated into Pan American's expanding passenger network. I wanted to do my best to avoid trying to summarize the entire history of Pan American Airways, but that game premise captures the gist. Pan American was the pioneer of the modern international passenger airline and did so by gradually consolidating and incorporating regional airlines into a growing web. And this is captured by the unique game board. I love this thing because it's centered on Miami, a pretty unique view of the world unless you're Pitbull. And much like Pitbull, Pan American is going from Mr. 305 to Mr. Worldwide, because gradually its network grows in outward spirals from Miami, reflecting the slow acquisition and expansion of their intercity, intercountry, and eventually intercontinental connections as it became the first global airline. And interestingly, in the game, you don't play as Pan American, but rather regional airlines competing to be bought out by Pan American as it expands. And so I'm going to leave off the video there. Stay tuned for next time.